Work matters. That's what Adrian said the morning I carried a warm box of cream puffs like a peace offering, and an hour later, a security guard called another woman my husband's spouse to my face. If you've ever had a day fold in on you like thin paper in a hard wind, tap like and subscribe so more of us can find each other when the floor gives way. I should tell you my name. I am Denise Carter, and I am not a fool. I bake when I'm nervous, I iron collars when I'm angry, and when I am hurt, I become quiet enough to hear what people think they are hiding. That morning began at Sugar Mill Bakery, the air sweet with vanilla and the hum of the mixer beating hope into butter. 6 cream puffs, I told the girl behind the counter. Powdered sugar on all, I added, because Adrian always teases me about leaving fingerprints on the boxes like a thief at the scene. He'd been late 4 nights running, and last night he'd said the words that land in a marriage like a brick in a pond. Work matters. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Work matters. Conversation later. I carried that box through the business district where the glass towers wear the sky like borrowed clothes. Meridian Urban Builders stands just off the plaza, 7 floors of reflected weather, every edge polished to an angle that dares you to look in. The plan was simple. Drop by his office, make him laugh with the powdered sugar smile. Remind him we have a life beyond blueprints and budgets. It is funny how plans are like eggs. They crack the second you forget how fragile they are. Inside the lobby, cool air slid over my shoulders, and the floor gleamed like a lake under light. I queued at the visitor kiosk, balancing my white bakery box against my hip. Before I could type Adrian's name into the touch screen, a voice warm and familiar from other afternoons floated over the desk. "Miss Carter, afternoon," Mr. Laurent said. He is a gentleman who wears patience like a uniform. "You've got your guest pass with you?" I smiled. "I'm just running these up. I know the way." He looked at the box, then at the tablet. "I'm sorry. Without an active pass, you'll need Adrian to come sign you in." He lowered his voice as if sharing a kindness. "Policy tightened this month. You know how it is. Project confidentiality. There are sentences that ask you to swallow your pride dry." "Of course," I said, setting the box on the counter so the string wouldn't cut into my palm. "Would you give him a ring for me?" Mr. Laurent tapped a number. He listened. "He's in a conference," he said finally. "I can send a message to his assistant." The phones in corporate lobbies always sound like fate, whispering through a tunnel. "It's all right," I answered, though it wasn't. "He knows I'm coming. I'll just text him." I moved aside and texted, "In the lobby with Truce Pastries." 2 minutes, 3 dots bloomed, then vanished. When the elevator chimed and a cluster spilled out, I recognized Victor Dixon from a barbecue last spring where everyone spoke in project nicknames like the city were a board game. "Victor," I said, lifting the box a little. "Adrian in?" His smile was quick, a card flipped and pocketed. "Big review for Riverbend. He's been buried since dawn." He glanced at the box, then past me, already walking. "Catch you later." Riverbend. I'd heard that name in our kitchen, over the sink at midnight when he thought I was asleep. Riverbend Boulevard Residences, the one with the public-private financing and the mayor's attention like a hand on its shoulder. I turned back to Mr. Laurent. "I can wait," I said. He studied me with that guard's kindness that is not pity, but distance. "Miss Carter, I'm sure he will appreciate the truce." He tapped a second time. "His assistant says he'll call when they break." The lobby clock told me more time had passed than I had intended to give. I walked to the edge of the plaza where the glass showed me my reflection with the city layered behind. My blouse a little too perfect, my smile a little too patient. Through the window line above, I could make out his office. Corner glass, blinds half turned like watchful eyelids. On the windowsill, a pale shape perched. When the sun slid out between clouds, it caught in a white rose vase that I did not own and had never seen. A sliver of hard hat yellow reflected from a frame beside it. People bring flowers to offices. People keep photos from old projects. Hadn't Adrian said they were doing site visits every other day? I told myself a reasonable story and held it in my mouth without swallowing. Then the revolving door gave a soft whump, and a woman walked in with the kind of ease that says, "A place knows you." She had a portfolio tube slung crosswise and the tired competence of someone who lives on deadlines. The security camera's lens winked as she approached the desk. "Natalia," Mr. Laurent said, the way you say a regular's name at a neighborhood diner. He slid a temporary badge across the counter without even asking for ID. "Afternoon." "Afternoon," she answered, and her voice, low and unhurried, made something old scrape across the floor of my chest. I had seen her once, a wedding photo in a box of Adrian's past, an old apology shaped like a picture frame. The ex-wife. The architect who had moved to consulting, last I heard, in a tone that suggested a faraway city. "Natalia," I repeated, just to be sure I was awake. Mr. Laurent looked up. "Oh, Miss Carter," he said with a smile that was meant to include me. "Your spouse's meeting will run another half hour. If you like, I can let her know you're waiting so she can take you up." I wish I could tell you I misheard. He gestured toward Natalia, who had already clipped the badge to her lapel and was turning toward the elevators. "Mr. Brooks's spouse," he added, as if he were explaining why a tide goes in and out. "There are seconds that unmake whole years." "I'm his spouse," I said, very quiet, as if the floor would tilt if I raised my voice. The bakery box string creaked in my grip. He blinked, the kindness slipping on the ice of embarrassment. "My apologies, Miss Carter. I see so many faces." He shifted, clearing his throat. "I only meant, she is often—" His words, good and polite, reached for a door that wasn't there. Natalia had turned, her gaze skimming me, not unfriendly, not intimate, measuring. For a fraction of a moment her eyebrows lifted as if she recognized something in the way I kept my shoulders square. "Adrian's in the Riviera. Riverbend Review," she said to Mr. Laurent, pronouncing the project like a familiar street. "I'll head up." It would have been so easy to make a scene, but a woman learns the cost of public tears. Of course, I told nobody in particular, the words lying flat. I stood aside and watched her step into the elevator, the doors closing on the slice of her face that could have belonged to any past. When you can't go up, you go wide. I took the long route around the plaza to the garage ramp, where cars nosed in like patient animals. My heart was beating high, in my throat where it doesn't belong. I am not proud of what I did next, or perhaps I am. Perhaps I am exactly proud because there are times when dignity is the quiet shape of resistance. I began to walk like a woman with time, observing. In the lane by the curb, a silver sedan eased up to the ticket spout and took a stub. The driver's profile was not Natalia's, broad-shouldered, cap low, but the passenger seat held a long black case like a blueprint tube I had seen a minute before. When the car paused at the crosswalk, I lifted my phone, not to photograph faces but to capture what would not change. The plate. I said it under my breath as if learning a prayer. 547 LMA. I typed it into a note, then added, Silver Sedan, 12:46 p.m. MUB Garage. Natalia present. I tapped a timestamp. If this is your first time hearing how a heart breaks, you need to know it happens not all at once, but like a railing giving way under your hand. First a wobble, then the air. I pressed my palm against the cool garage wall and breathed. When the dizziness passed, I went back into the lobby and retrieved my box. Mr. Laurent opened his mouth to apologize again. I spared him, raised a hand. "It's not you," I said, and it wasn't. The elevators opened onto the floor where Adrian's office sits, like a glass aquarium of meetings. I did not badge through. I stood at the corner where corridor becomes lobby, at a respectful distance, and looked through the transparent angles like any stranger. The white rose vase glowed against the window, a polite lighthouse. On his credenza, a framed photo leaned, Adrian and Natalia in hard hats, their smiles mid-laugh, the river bend site a spread of rebar and hope behind them. On the table near the window, a stack of blueprints lay under a contract folder, stenciled with the project name, River Bend Boulevard Residences. A pen with our neighborhood bank's logo rested on top. I made another note, white roses, hard hat photo, Adrian and end contract folder, Riverbend, 12:59 p.m. Behind the glass, Adrian gestured at something on a plan while Victor talked over a spreadsheet. Natalia sat at the far end, elbows tight to her sides, the way architects sit when they are holding an idea steady. When the door opened, voices spilled into the hall and were caught again. "We need Phase 3 permits before the bond window," Victor was saying. "Public comment calendar is sliding." I stepped back, because a wife should not look like a reporter at her husband's office fishbowl. The bakery box felt heavy now, ridiculous in its cheer. I set it on a side table and brushed sugar from my knuckle onto a tissue. It left a dusting, like first frost. My phone buzzed. A text from Adrian at last. In a thing. Later. And then delayed. Another. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Not ready. I stared at the words until they blurred. The phrase fit so neatly into the grooves his silence had carved that it almost made sense. I shoved the box a few inches along the table, then pulled it back, as if moving it could move the day. I must tell you something ordinary because pain lives beside detail. In the glass, I caught my reflection, and beyond it, the skinny maple in the plaza, lifting its branches to a sky the color of old paper. Past the window, a woman crossed the square carrying a toddler on her hip, the child's sneakered foot bouncing against her. For a breath, I saw a child's superhero backpack propped in the back seat of a car idling at the curb. Bright red with a lightning bolt, the kind Adrian always pauses to admire when we pass the elementary school, because he says children carry courage on their shoulders without knowing. The backpack startled me because it looked so much like a photo Adrian had sent from a community meeting last fall. Future Riverbend residents, he had typed, a row of kids grinning, capes printed on the backs of their shirts. I stood there long enough to feel foolish. Then something in me stood up straighter than the rest. If they would not talk to me, I would listen. If I could not go through the door, I would notice who came and who left, what they carried, where they parked, what time the light changed across his desk. I have learned that truth is often a schedule, not a speech. When the meeting broke, I moved back toward the elevators, blending with the quiet shuffle of a courier and a woman with a cart of binders. Natalia came out first, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, the temporary badge now caught in the strap of her bag. She walked with the tired grace of someone who knows how much a city weighs. She did not look toward me. She did not need to. The men followed in a rope of talk that reached into the hall and fell off short. Adrian did glance up, a quick sweep that caught the bakery box, paused, and moved on. He could have stepped toward me. He did not. He touched the frame on his credenza without looking at it, a thoughtless, familiar gesture, and I felt the careful, thin part of me tear. I carried the box back to the lobby and thanked Mr. Laurent with my chin held at just the right angle. Outside, the plaza air smelled like rain that might not arrive. I sat on a bench where the stone held the sun's warmth and opened the lid. Powdered sugar puffed into the light like a white lie. I placed one cream puff into a napkin and left the rest for a receptionist who would not know they were a truce offering that found no battlefield. Then I began. Not later, not when he was ready, not when work decided to make room for marriage. Now. I opened my phone and created a folder labeled Riverbend MUB Observations. I typed the plate again, Silver Sedan, 547 LMA, timestamps. Names. I wrote the words White Rose Vase, Hard Hat Photo, Adrian and Natalia, and beneath them I added, with a steadiness that surprised me, begin mapping pattern of arrivals, confirm ex-wife role via public sources. No confrontation until facts in hand. I slid my wedding band around my finger once, the way you turn a dial to catch a station. There is a superstition that if you name the next move, fear will hear you and try to change your mind. I named it anyway. Tomorrow I would return without a smile and without a box, and I would stand where the garage met the street and watch who came for my husband and why. And as I whispered that decision to myself, clear as a prayer, I lifted my eyes and saw Natalia step into the silver sedan with the blueprint tube across her knees, the brake lights flaring like a warning as the car pulled away toward the ramp, and the truth I would no longer be polite enough to ignore. I closed my phone on a final note and made a quiet vow that tasted like metal. I will get the facts before I get the tears, starting with 547 LMA. The next morning, I learned how quiet a city can be when you have decided to listen to it. I reached the plaza before the first rush, early enough that the janitor's cart still rattled along the glass and the air smelled like damp stone. Mr. Laurent nodded from his post. "Morning, Ms. Carter." The way he said it told me he had replayed yesterday and wished it had landed differently. I smiled without teeth and kept walking, circling toward the garage mouth where exhaust curls rise like breath on cold glass. I tell you this because it matters. I did not come to accuse. I came to observe. At 12 minutes past 8, I logged the first entry. Silver Sedan 547 LMA entering. Passenger not visible, driver wearing a cap, short brim. At 29 past, a rideshare deposited Natalia at the curb. Portfolio tube again. She waved to the guard like someone who no longer needed to learn anyone's name. I wrote, Natalia arrives by rideshare. Cab driver likely separate. Cross-check later. By 9, the sunlight cut across the lobby floor in a band that made strangers squint as they signed the tablet. A courier wheeled boxes marked Riverbend Phase 3, Public Records. I stood by the cafe kiosk with a cup I did not drink and watched the elevator register. Every time the doors opened on Adrian's floor, my heart did that small, improper jump. the one you get before a phone call that will not bring the news you want. At 10, I moved 2 blocks to a cafe off Quai Rivière where the tables are set close enough for people to overhear each other and pretend not to. I spread my phone, a spiral notebook, and a city planning packet I had found online the night before. Public meetings leave a trail, a notice, an agenda, a list of consultants. Riverbend's agenda lay open on page 3 with a consultant list that made my throat tighten. Architectural design, N. Moore, principal, contracted. Contracted, not internal, a word choice that means the badge she clips on says guest until the end of the project. I underlined the line twice and wrote in the margin, ex-wife hired. Internal secrecy likely to avoid rumor. Verify. It was cleaner to see it in print than to feel it in my ribs. I opened Adrian's text thread and scrolled with my finger like I was turning prayer beads. Midnight, 1 night ago. I'm not ready for that conversation yet. A week earlier. Site ran long. Go to sleep. 2 weeks. Working through Sunday. We'll make it up. Sprinkled such that you could not see the pattern unless you stood back. I tapped the phone log. He had good habits, family calls on Sunday afternoons, short check-ins at lunch. But lately a new number threaded through the days at odd hours, sometimes unanswered, sometimes a minute or two, sometimes 12 or 15. I do not have the bad taste to pretend I didn't look up the number. It matched a business listing for more design and consulting. Facts are not betrayals. They are floors that don't tip when you stand on them. You would think a day like this would be one long ache, but it was a chain of small clicks, and each one locked the next. At noon, I returned to the plaza and watched the elevator bank. I heard Victor's voice carry over the marble as he spoke to someone on his way out. "Keep the badge names generic," he said. Not unkindly, just efficient. "No last names on visitor logs. We don't need chatter." The word chatter is what men call women's talk when they do not want to hear it. I wrote it down. Generic badges, internal secrecy to manage optics. I was not looking for romance. I was sketching policy around a void. When I stepped outside again, the silver sedan was idling at the curb. I had been so careful not to grant it meaning that it startled me to find it obvious. The passenger door opened and the blueprint tube slid in. Then Natalia, cheeks flushed, the way a corridor warms people who have been too long under fluorescent lights. But what made me blink was the back seat, where a child's superhero backpack leaned as if a small shoulder had slid out of it moments before. The red was a laughter red, the lightning bolt a bright cut. The door shut. The brake lights flared. The ramp swallowed the car. I am not proud to tell you that I followed. A woman who has learned to walk on sidewalks full of men learns also how to move without showing her intention. The sedan stayed just ahead, never too fast, cutting left, right, left, through streets I knew but had never arranged in that order. When they turned toward the clinic complex on the edge of the river district, my stomach went cold and useful. People bring flowers to offices. People keep photos. People also take children to doctors when they have to. The car pulled to a stop in the patient drop-off. Natalia got out with the blueprint tube and a small hand that came from the other side. The child hopped once to settle his balance, a little boy in a jacket with elbow patches. He was the kind of beautiful that children are when they have been loved. Nothing to do with features, all to do with the way they look at the world and know it will catch them. It is easy to be dramatic when you want to be hurt. It is harder to be accurate. From the sidewalk, I watched them go in. I counted to 60, then followed, not close enough to make a shadow. The pediatric clinic lobby held the scatter of midday. 2 babies, 1 toddler tugging at a fishprint curtain, a teenager slumped like a poem no one had taught him to read. The receptionist called names in an efficient rhythm. Hernandez, Mia. Talbot, Jonah. Then clear, the name that rang in my chest like a key striking a glass. Wells, Leo. Wells. Not Brooks. Not Moore. Wells, said as if anyone might know it. The little boy popped up with that endearing solemnity children wear when they are told to be brave and do their best. "That's me," he told the receptionist, his hand still attached to the woman at his side. The woman was not Natalia. She had the same dark eyes, the same bone along the cheek, but younger and tired in a different way. Brianna, the younger sister I had heard in stories told like weather reports. She carried the superhero backpack like luggage she was grateful to have put down. The receptionist smiled. "Insurance on file and self-pay copay today." She reached for a clipboard. Brianna reached for a card. "There is a moral that says you should look away from other people's money. There is another that says women should see each other clear enough to help." I saw the way Brianna winced when the amount was said, how she shuffled bills and card and a folded piece of paper as if a way to make 2 numbers equal might appear if she just turned the page again. The receptionist lowered her voice and the next name slipped over it like a lid. I did not hear the amount, and I did not need to. I wrote in my notes, child called Wells Leo, woman with him, Brianna. Natalia present, not at desk, financial strain visible. Natalia came out of a side hallway a moment later, a clipboard in hand, moving like someone who knows how to take instructions and turn them into decisions. She touched Brianna's shoulder. "They'll call you next," she said. I watched the child lean toward her without ceremony and the way she steadied him without thinking. There are families made of paperwork and families made of hands doing what is needed. The best are both. You may wonder how I felt, seeing a boy whose eyes, at a glance, reflected my husband's in that trick of resemblance that doesn't mean a thing and means everything. I felt relief so sharp it made me put my hand on the wall. Like many women, I had a story ready to hurt myself with. The clinic refused it politely. Wells, Leo Wells. I repeated it under my breath until it was not a threat, but a fact. Outside, I sat on the low stone planter and let myself be still. The day shone stupidly pretty, as if the city were hung with clean laundry. When the silver sedan pulled to the curb again an hour later, I did not pretend not to see it. Natalia opened the rear door. The backpack went in. Then Leo, who negotiated his seatbelt with the diplomatic seriousness of a child who has been told safety is a promise. Brianna followed slower, her hand pressed low on her abdomen for one careful step, and I understood in a plain flash why the backpack had been in the car and why money made her shoulders rise. Recovery takes the long road. I raised my phone and took a single photo of the sedan's rear, plate, bumper sticker from a local hardware store, and put the phone away as if it were hot. I did not go home. I walked to the river and sat where the light drags diamonds out of brown water. I thought about the white rose vase on Adrian's sill and what roses are good for besides apology. I thought about the hard hat photo and how laughter captured in glass doesn't mean the person you love was laughing at you, and I thought about how secrecy corrodes the truth it is meant to protect. Perhaps he had kept Natalia's hiring quiet to prevent chatter at the office, to protect a reputation that would survive a rumor better than a fact bent by silence. Perhaps. The space between perhaps and proof is where marriages break. Late afternoon, my phone vibrated with a calendar notification I had not seen before. Adrian shares his calendar with me, a small kindness that had drifted into habit. The new entry was not labeled boldly. It was a block of gray at 6 o'clock with a location pin, Marcel's Corner Bistro. The label read simply, Riverbend Catch-Up, no names. Marcel's sits at the bend where the street narrows and the awning makes a kind of umbrella for the hours people do not want to carry into their homes. I stood up and went. The bistro's front window fogs gently when the pasta water steams, and the evening rush leans first on one foot, then the other. I stopped at the corner and watched the door open twice, once for a woman with a laptop, once for a pair of men whose suits looked like they had learned to shrug. At 5:55, the silver sedan rolled to a smooth stop 2 doors down. The man in the cap stayed behind the wheel. Natalia got out alone, portfolio tube in hand, and went in. I took a breath that tasted like basil and regret and crossed to the door. Inside, the light is always warm, as if Marcel has discovered a way to keep 3 o'clock sun trapped in glass. A server slid past and a bar towel squeaked against a wine glass. At the bar, a check presenter lay open. The top slip stamped Meridian Urban Builders, project card and signed with initials I recognized as Victor's. I took a quick photo, halfway to the kind of evidence that buoys you and halfway to the kind that drowns. At 6 exactly, the door behind me moved air across my shoulders, and Adrian walked in, wearing the day's worry like a jacket he did not know he still had on. He did not see me. He saw the hostess and gave the practiced half smile of a man who thinks he is being professional in public. "Table for 2, he said. The hostess glanced at the tablet. "Meeting under Riverbend?" she asked. He nodded. "They're just up the stairs," she said, and then, with that instinct, "People have to gather the edges of other people's lives." She added, "Your party's already here." I let him go up first, past the framed city maps and the chalkboard that promises fresh gnocchi on Thursdays. He reached the landing and turned right to the upper room where the tables are tucked among potted lemon trees that someone winters somewhere else. Natalia stood as he approached, the portfolio tube upright against her leg like a flagpole at ease. I did not hear their first words. I did not need to. His shoulders sloped forward the way they do when he wants to be competent and kind at the same time and cannot do both with the same sentence. I could have turned and left with my dignity folded under my arm like a napkin I meant to wash at home. Instead, I looked over the banister and saw at a table near the stairs a woman with a small boy drawing on the back of a paper menu, his superhero backpack hanging from the chair back like a bright, breathing thing. Brianna had chosen a seat where she could rise without effort, and she held her glass in a way that suggested she was measuring how much of the evening she would take and how much she would leave behind. The boy had drawn a crooked lightning bolt that made him grin when he lifted the paper to check his work against the real one. What I did next was not theatrical. I walked to the host stand and gave my name as if it were a reservation I had made in another life. "I'll be joining a party," I said. The host looked up the stairs, then at me, then down again at whatever instructions good restaurants keep in their tablets. "Of course," he said, and reached for 2 extra menus as if more chairs were always the plan. I climbed the stairs, and the floorboards made that soft, honest sound old wood makes when it has carried people for years. Natalia saw me first. Her eyes did not widen. She is not a woman who wastes motion. Adrian turned, and something flashed through his face that was not guilt or anger, but relief cut with fear. Relief that he would not have to keep balancing two truths, and fear that he might drop both. Before he could open his mouth, I put my hand on the back of the chair opposite him and let my voice come out steady as a line drawn along a ruler. "Adrian," I said, and the room, obliging as always, got quiet enough for everyone at our table to hear what came next. There's a sound a room makes when the truth steps in. It's not silence. It's the hush between two breaths before someone decides who they'll be next. "Adrian," I said again, because once wasn't enough. He rose halfway, then thought better of it. His hand hovered over the table as though to invite calm, but I had brought my own calm with me, cool and sharp like river glass. Natalia stayed seated, fingers resting on the edge of her portfolio tube. "Denise," she said, and her voice carried a balance of professional respect and private caution. "I think we should—" "You should both sit," I cut in. "I came to eat like everybody else." The hostess, kind enough to pretend she saw nothing, set a third menu down and disappeared. Adrian's eyes darted toward the stairs. "This isn't what it looks like," he said softly. "It rarely is," I answered. "But we'll find out what it is, won't we?" For a long breath, no one spoke. Brianna, at the table near the stairwell, had turned discreetly toward Leo, helping him spell a word on his menu. The boy hummed, unconcerned, the sound of innocence doing its work. Natalia cleared her throat first. "Denise, the project, Riverbend, has me consulting on design. I'm not at MUB full-time. It's temporary, strictly professional." "And the dinners?" I asked. "The shared meetings that run until midnight? The white rose vase on his windowsill?" "That was from a client," she said. "A promotional bouquet." Adrian rubbed his temples. "I should have told you," he murmured. "Victor and I brought her in when the city stalled the permits. She's one of the few with clearance from the planning board after that zoning debacle last year." "So you decided to keep it quiet," I said, "to avoid the appearance of impropriety." He nodded. "Exactly that." I tapped the table once with my fingertip. "You achieved the appearance anyway." Natalia flinched. Not guilt, but recognition. "Denise," she said, "you deserve honesty. The child you saw, Leo, is my nephew, Brianna's boy. She's been recovering from abdominal surgery. Adrian helped with a short-term loan so she wouldn't lose her apartment." I turned to Adrian. "That true?" He nodded again, slow. "She didn't want charity. I made it formal. Just a personal note until she gets back to work." "How generous," I said, the words too even to sound kind. Natalia's voice gentled. "He told me you might misunderstand. I told him you wouldn't." That landed like a small stone. "You shouldn't have spoken for me." "No," she admitted, "but I know what suspicion can do. I lived through that, too." Something in her gaze softened, not defensive, not proud, just tired. And in that moment I saw the shared history between them, not as threat, but as an old scar they both preferred not to reopen. I stood before the first tears could start. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "You'll forgive me if I've lost my appetite." Adrian reached for my wrist, a gesture that used to feel like home. "Please, let's talk tonight." "You'd better," I said, "because tomorrow my patience goes on strike." I left before either could answer. That night, the apartment felt too clean. You can tell the measure of a home by how noise behaves inside it. Ours carried echoes like a place rehearsing emptiness. I set the empty cream puff box on the counter, a memorial to intentions gone stale. Adrian came in late, smelling of rain and air conditioning. He dropped his keys, then looked at me across the kitchen island as if crossing a border. "Thank you for not making a scene," he said. "I saved it for later," I answered. He exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Denise, I was wrong not to tell you. When the board suggested Natalia for the redesign, I wanted to decline. Victor pushed for it. She knows the project inside out. I thought if I told you, it would sound like I was chasing the past. And instead, you made me chase it," I said. He winced. "You're right. I panicked. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't deceit. It was cowardice dressed as professionalism." "Cowardice," I repeated, tasting the word. "You could have told me about the loan, too." He hesitated. "I didn't want you to think I was trying to fix everyone's problems again." "You are," I said, "except ours." He sank onto the couch. "Work matters, Denise. You know that." The phrase, that same refrain, cut through the air like a repeated mistake. "So does truth," I said, "and you've been short-staffed on that department." He looked up. "I'll prove it. I'll show you the transfer receipt." He did, pulled up his phone, showed a bank record. $2,000 transferred to B. Moore 3 weeks ago. Memo line, medical advance. It should have calmed me. It didn't. Proof can quiet suspicion, but it can't erase the echo. We slept on opposite sides of the bed that night, a continent of linen between us. The next morning, I went to work at the Children's Development Center, a place that smells like crayons and resilience. Jordan Scott, our program coordinator, was stapling newsletters. "You look like someone who's trying not to throw a stapler," he said. "Just another marital case study," I muttered. He grinned. "We're hiring a part-time bookkeeper, you know, someone organized but calm under pressure. Maybe I should advertise it as therapeutic occupation for frustrated wives." I smiled despite myself. "You might get more applications than you think." While he talked, my mind worked elsewhere. I had decided not to sit idle in confusion. If Adrian had extended a loan to Brianna, maybe I could help close the loop properly, on paper, with dignity. At lunch, I stopped by MUB to drop off some donated children's art for their community board. Inside the glass lobby, Victor Dixon stood near the elevator speaking to another manager. Their voices carried just enough. "If this contract gets questioned, the board won't like personal entanglements," Victor said. "Brooks needs to keep optics clean. The city's sensitive after last year's scandal." "Understood," the other man replied. Optics, entanglements, the vocabulary of people who think feelings are liabilities. I pretended to check my phone until they walked off. Then I typed one note: MUB internal, risk. Personal entanglements comment, confirms secrecy motive. Mr. Laurent nodded as I passed. "Better day, Miss Carter?" "Getting there," I said, and I almost meant it. Outside, the autumn wind caught a leaf and rolled it toward the curb where a child's red backpack, superhero lightning and all, peeked from a parked car window. I recognized it immediately. Brianna must have brought Leo downtown again. An impulse carried me 2 blocks further to the pediatric clinic. She wasn't there. Instead, a woman at the front desk handed me an envelope I hadn't asked for, thinking I was family. "For Ms. Moore," she said. "We couldn't reach her." The envelope bore a payment notice past due, addressed to Brianna Moore. I slipped it into my tote, meaning to deliver it in person. That evening, I found her name listed on the community volunteers roster. She'd signed up to assist at our development center's weekend event. Fate doesn't knock. It sends emails. Saturday came, bright and ordinary. The children's laughter from the play yard rose like applause to no one in particular. Brianna arrived 10 minutes early, her steps careful but determined. Leo clung to her leg before spotting the sandbox and running off. She smiled, shy. "Miss Carter, right? Adrian's wife?" "That's me," I said, extending a hand. "Please, call me Denise." She took it, her grip delicate but honest. "I was hoping to see you," she said. "I wanted to thank you for not assuming the worst." "You don't owe me thanks," I replied. "You owe yourself a little rest." She laughed lightly. "That's rare these days, between recovery and bills." Her sentence drifted off, replaced by a sigh that said more. I opened my tote and handed her the envelope. "The clinic gave me this by mistake." Color drained from her face. "Oh, thank you. I was late paying. The surgery left me with more debt than I can manage. Adrian's been kind, but I hate relying on anyone." I nodded. "He mentioned the loan." She looked embarrassed. "He shouldn't have." "It's fine," I said, "but I might have a solution. We're short-staffed at the center. There's an opening for an assistant bookkeeper. Flexible hours, good pay, and close enough that Leo can attend our after-school program." Her eyes widened. "I have accounting experience from before Leo was born." "Then it's yours, if you want it," I said. Brianna hesitated, fingers tightening on the envelope. "Adrian might think—" "He doesn't have to think," I interrupted gently. "This is between us." She looked at me, truly looked, and I saw in her eyes a reflection of my own exhaustion, the kind women wear when they've been surviving too long on faith and half-truths. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll take it." I smiled. "Good. Come Monday, we'll start the paperwork." She turned toward Leo, calling him softly. The boy came running, sand in his shoes, laughter in his throat. And as I watched them, something inside me shifted. Less anger, more purpose. Because if I couldn't control what Adrian hid, I could control what I built next. The wind carried the faint scent of roses from the nearby florist, and I thought about the white rose vase still sitting on that office windowsill, a fragile symbol of civility in a place built on glass. But as Brianna thanked me again and Leo tugged at her sleeve, I felt a steadier resolve form under the ache. I would bring order where secrecy had brought confusion. And I would start Monday when I stepped into MUB not as a hurt wife, but as a woman ready to write the truth in numbers and ink. Because what Adrian didn't yet know was that his careful secrets had just made me part of the equation. And this time, the balance would be mine to set. Monday morning came with the kind of optimism only paperwork can give. Brianna arrived at the Children's Center clutching a modest handbag and an apology for being early. I told her that early was a language I understood. Jordan Scott introduced her to the office computer, and within minutes she was sorting receipts by instinct. Someone who knows what it's like to stretch $1 until it hums. By midweek, she had color-coded the expense reports better than any volunteer before her. "You were right," she said during lunch, eyes bright. "Numbers make sense when nothing else does." I smiled. "That's why I like them. They don't lie, unless someone tells them to." She laughed, not catching the shadow behind my words. Leo, attending the center's after-school group, darted past the doorway waving his crayon masterpiece. For a moment the room felt lighter, as if kindness itself were measurable. The following Friday, an internal memo arrived. Meridian Urban Builders to sponsor Community Outreach Fair at Children's Development Center. Director A. Brooks to attend. I stared at the bold text, half amused, half wary. Life has an unkind sense of symmetry. The same company that taught me suspicion would now host a fair on my home turf. That evening over dinner, I mentioned it to Adrian. "I saw your name on our outreach announcement," I said. He looked up from his tablet. "Yes, marketing insisted, corporate image." "Optics again," I said. He nodded, missing the edge in my tone. "Victor wants Natalia to showcase the Riverbend model to the parents. Build goodwill before the zoning hearing. It's harmless." "Nothing's harmless when you mix work and secrets," I said, keeping my voice even. He sighed. "Denise, can we stop calling everything a secret? I made mistakes, but there's no conspiracy." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to remember our first apartment, the one where we painted the living room at midnight because we couldn't afford movers and decided wet paint was an adventure. But memories are like coins. They buy nothing when trust is bankrupt. "I'll see you at the fair then," I said. He reached across the table, but I busied myself stacking plates. The next day at MUB, the lobby smelled of espresso and controlled ambition. I dropped off some flyers for the event. Mr. Laurent greeted me with that gentle caution reserved for people whose tempers might still be healing. "Ms. Carter," he said, "your husband's in meet in 3. Big one." I won't disturb him. As I waited by the elevator, Victor's voice carried again, crisp, efficient. "Adrian, the city's review board isn't convinced on Phase 3 permits. We need cleaner documentation on private loans to sub-consultants. They're sniffing for conflicts of interest." Private loans. My ears sharpened. Adrian's reply came low. "Everything's documented. I handled it personally." Victor exhaled. "That's the problem." The elevator opened. I stepped in before they could see me, heart tapping against my ribs. Documentation. Conflict of interest. I didn't need a lawyer to connect that to Brianna's medical advance. Later that afternoon, while Brianna filed donation receipts, I caught her glancing at a folded document peeking from her purse. She slid it away quickly, embarrassed. "Clinic invoice, already paid," she said. "I wanted to show you. I'm finally caught up." I nodded, relieved for her, though the mention of paid twisted in my stomach. "I'm glad," I said. "You earned a clean start." When she left for the day, I noticed the envelope corner still visible. The stamp read, "Check processed via corporate fund, MUB." Not personal, not private. Corporate. Something in Adrian's story no longer fit the numbers. That night, my phone rang after 9. The display read, "Natalia Moore." I hesitated, then answered. "This is Denise." "Thank you for picking up," she said. Her tone carried that same evenness I'd once mistaken for arrogance. "I'd like to talk. Not as colleagues' wives, just as two people stuck in the same misunderstanding." "I'm listening." "I didn't come to MUB to disrupt your life. I tried telling Adrian to be transparent. He said it would complicate optics. That phrase again." She exhaled softly. "He thought if you saw us working together, you'd assume the worst. He underestimated you." "That seems to be a habit," I said. "There's more," she continued. "A community grant under the Riverbend project. He linked MUB funds to your children's center for the outreach fair. It's legitimate. Public partnership paperwork. I'll send you the email so you know it's not some backroom favor." A pause. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure which emotion the words carried. "He's a good man," she said, "but he believes control equals protection. It doesn't." Before hanging up, she added almost gently, "Don't punish Brianna for my surname. She's had enough of that." I promised I wouldn't. The next morning, I walked to the Riverbend construction site. The air smelled of dust and wet concrete, progress with a pulse. Workers shouted over the clang of steel. In the distance, I saw the silver sedan parked near the office trailer, plate glinting in the sun, 547 LMA. I raised my phone and took another photo, more habit than suspicion. Natalia's email arrived an hour later. Subject line, Riverbend Community Integration Grant. Inside, a thread of correspondence between MUB's Community Division and our center's administrative board, transparent, ordinary, and yet, attached at the bottom, a document labeled Amended Loan Agreement. I clicked. The PDF opened to a neat contract bearing Adrian's signature and a witness line signed by Victor Dixon. The amount, $25,000. Purpose, private bridge assistance, consultant medical contingency. Consultant, medical contingency. $25,000, not two. My stomach turned to ice. I scrolled, reading the clauses. Repayment deferred, interest waived, confidentiality requested until project closeout. His language was careful, professional, airtight, and deceitful. I stared at the digits until they blurred into light and shadow. The vase of white roses on our windowsill, brought home last week, office leftovers, reflected faintly in the glass. Its petals had begun to wilt, edges curling like secrets too long kept. I picked up the phone and dialed Adrian. The call rang once, twice, 4 times. Voicemail. "Adrian," I said when the tone beeped, "I'm looking at a loan agreement you never mentioned, $25,000, signed by you and Victor. I want to know how much you really gave her and why you needed to hide it under company funds." My voice stayed calm, almost gentle, but my hand trembled against the counter. Outside, the city's lights blinked in the window, each reflection dancing around the vase like small, restless confessions. I whispered to the empty room, "How much did you really give her, Adrian?" The question hung in the air, soft and dangerous, waiting for an answer the night refused to bring. When he finally came home, the clock read a little past midnight, and the roses had begun to lean as if listening. Adrian set his briefcase down quietly, but quiet doesn't save a man who has already been found out. "Where were you?" I asked, voice steady, too calm to sound harmless. He didn't meet my eyes. "Work ran late." "Work always runs late when lies have to catch up to it." He froze halfway out of his jacket. "Denise." I slid the printed loan agreement across the counter. $25,000, not two, signed by you and Victor. Witness line and confidentiality clause. Do you want to explain why your compassion required non-disclosure? He paled slightly, then sat down. "Where did you get that?" "Public records trail," I said. "Natalia sent a legitimate email, remember? You forgot attachments tell stories, too." He pressed his palms together, thumbs trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" "She was denied post-op coverage," he said finally. "Her sister couldn't qualify for extended sick pay. MUB's consultant fund had a discretionary contingency for medical hardship. I authorized an advance, planned to reimburse the account when she repaid. It wasn't theft, it was decency." "Decency doesn't need secrecy," I said. He swallowed. "Victor told me to keep it quiet. until the audit window passed. He said the board wouldn't understand personal motivations. And you listened. He's my associate director, Adrian said. He manages compliance. I thought, that loyalty meant safety, I finished. And now it looks like complicity. He rubbed his face. I wanted to protect her. And yes, you already thought the worst. I looked at the drooping roses between us. You protected everything except the truth. He reached across the table, desperate. Denise, I didn't betray you. Maybe not with love, I said, but you did with omission. We sat in that stillness that only marriages on the edge know. The night clock hummed in its casing. I'll fix it, he said quietly, before the audit hits. Do that, I replied, and pray Victor doesn't fix it first. The next morning, I visited MUB. The lobby's mirrored columns made every anxious person appear twice, once as they were and once as they wished to be. Victor was already there, phone pressed to his ear, pacing by the reception desk. Tell compliance I want the documentation sealed until my review, he said, voice sharp. No leaks. The board doesn't need another headline. He ended the call and saw me. Ms. Carter, he greeted, courteous but tight. We're very proud of the center partnership. Big day coming. I'm sure, I said. I just came to drop off some outreach paperwork. His eyes flicked toward the folder under my arm. Everything runs smoother when people stay in their lanes. Good thing I billed mine, I said. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Careful, Mrs. Carter. Construction sites aren't safe for amateurs. I prefer facts, I said. They don't crumble under pressure. For a second, we just stood there. The polite war of professionals pretending civility is armor. Then he nodded toward the elevators. Give Adrian my regards. I already have, I said. By noon, I met Natalia at a cafe near the riverfront. She had dark circles under her eyes and a folder on the table. Victor's nervous, she said without preamble. He's been pulling project records, rearranging internal memos. He told the city's auditor you and Adrian might have misappropriated partnership funds. I stared at her. Me? She nodded. He mentioned your center's name in a compliance note linking the donation to the contingency loan. He's framing it as nepotism. That's absurd, I said. That's strategy, she corrected. He wants to take over Riverbend if Adrian's removed. I sank back in my chair. And you? I'm the consultant, she said. If he sinks, I lose my contract. If he stays, I lose my reputation. Either way, I lose. We sat in silence until the espresso machine hissed like a warning. I opened my notebook and began writing names, times, license plates, every thread of evidence I'd gathered since that first day at the plaza. You're documenting, Natalia said softly. I'm surviving, I answered. She reached into her folder and handed me a USB drive. Security logs, parking entries for the last month. You'll see Victor's truck, frequent late-night visits to the site with auditors and procurement reps. If anyone's cooking numbers, it's not your husband. I hesitated before taking it. Why help me? Because you're the only one who will use the truth instead of the headlines. By evening, the Children's Center buzzed with pre-fair chaos. Posters, donation boxes, and the smell of tempera paint pretending to be optimism. Brianna sat at her desk, shoulders hunched over a handwritten note. When I came closer, she tried to hide it, but I caught the words, repayment plan, $25,000 in monthly installments. You shouldn't be handling that alone, I said gently. Her eyes filled. I tried returning part of it. The accounting department said the transaction was internal and couldn't accept personal checks. They told me to wait for instruction. I think I've caused trouble for Adrian." "You didn't," I said. "He did, by keeping you in the dark." She looked down. "He only wanted to help. Nobody else would." "Help should never look like debt," I said softly. I left her with Jordan, who was setting up the outreach banners, and stepped outside. The autumn air had that electric chill that smells like endings. Across the street, the silver sedan idled again. My instincts tensed until Natalia stepped out. She handed me a small manila envelope. "I printed the vehicle log from the drive I gave you. Check the last entry, 3 nights ago. Victor and a city auditor at the Riverbend site, after hours." "Why?" I asked. "Maybe to plant something, maybe to find it. Either way, it's not good." That night, I drove to the site. The city was half asleep, streetlights bowing their heads. When I pulled into the empty lot, the temporary office trailers glowed pale under floodlights. I killed my headlights and watched. A black pickup, Victor's, was parked near the chain-link fence. A man in a gray coat stood beside him, clipboard reflecting the work lights. An auditor, by the look of the badge, clipped to his pocket. I raised my phone, snapped a photo through the windshield. Then a familiar silver sedan eased in beside the truck. Natalia. She stepped out, exchanged a few words, gesturing with visible frustration. The conversation grew heated. Even at a distance, I could see her point toward the trailer, her movements sharp. Victor said something that made her stop cold. I took another photo. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from certainty. I was staring at the pivot where compassion became corruption. As I tucked my phone away, it buzzed in my palm. An unknown number, no name, no city code. I answered on instinct. "Hello?" A pause. The faint hum of traffic. Then a man's voice, quiet and deliberate. "Stop digging, Mrs. Carter." Click. I lowered the phone slowly. Through the windshield, Victor turned his head toward the dark, as if he'd heard the same sound I had. The small, certain crack of truth splitting its shell. The silver sedan's brake lights flared once, casting red across the fence. I started the car, heartbeat loud in my ears, and whispered to myself, "You called the wrong woman." Then I pressed record on my voice memo app and drove toward the lights, ready to find out exactly what they were hiding. The night wind cut sharp across the Riverbend site, carrying the hum of generators and the far-off whine of city traffic. I stayed in my car, engine off, recorder running, eyes fixed on the small group by the trailers. Victor's voice carried first, steady, managerial, smug. "If Brooks doesn't step aside, the auditors will. We'll find the discrepancies ourselves." "Discrepancies," Natalia said, disbelief bending her voice. "You told him the contingency funds were compliant. You signed the witness line." He laughed softly. "Contracts are flexible stories, Natalia. Depends who's holding the pen." The man in the gray coat, the auditor, cleared his throat. "Mr. Dixon, the board will want documentation, not drama." "You'll have it," Victor said. "By tomorrow morning, the internal report will show that the $25,000 loan was unauthorized. He'll have no choice but to resign." My stomach turned to lead. Natalia's voice cut in, fierce now. "You're fabricating this. He documented every transfer. You told him to keep it quiet to protect the project." Victor's tone hardened. "And now I'm protecting the project from him. Don't forget your contract rides on my recommendation." That was enough. I clicked the memo app off, hands trembling but steady in purpose. The last thing I heard before starting the car was Natalia's voice, low, defiant. If you destroy him, Victor, I'll destroy your story. By sunrise, I hadn't slept. The recording looped in my ears as I sat at the kitchen table, white rose petals scattered around the vase like tiny resignations. When Adrian came out of the bedroom, his eyes told me he'd been awake too. "You were at the site," he said. "Yes," I answered. "You should hear what I heard." I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. His expression shifted. Confusion, shock, fury in quiet succession. When the recording ended, he sat back heavily. "He's setting me up." "Yes," I said, "and he's using Brianna's loan as bait." He rubbed his temples. "The audit's today. If he files first, the board will believe him." "Then you'll file first," I said. "With everything. Loan records, voice memo, and logs." He hesitated. "If I take you with me, they'll think I can't defend myself." "If you don't," I said, "they'll think you have something to hide." He met my gaze and nodded slowly. "Let's end this." The boardroom at Meridian Urban Builders smelled faintly of polish and nerves. A long glass table, too clean for comfort, reflected every anxious hand like evidence. Victor stood at the far end, gray suit immaculate, papers stacked like ammunition. Beside him sat the city auditor, clipboard ready. "Thank you all for assembling on short notice," Victor began smoothly. "We've identified irregularities within the Riverbend Partnership funds, traced to Director Brooks's discretionary actions." "That's a lie," Adrian said, voice firm. "And I can prove it." Victor's eyebrows lifted, half amusement, half mockery. "I'm sure you can." Adrian nodded to me. I stood, pressing my phone to the table speaker. "This is a recording from last night, taken at the Riverbend site." The room fell silent. Victor's own voice filled the space, confident, damning. "By tomorrow morning, the internal report will show that the $25,000 loan was unauthorized." When the clip ended, you could hear the air adjust. Adrian slid another folder forward, the amended loan contract, payment records, and Natalia's certified email trail. Every transfer was logged, approved under EMUB's Consultant Contingency Fund, and copied to Mr. Dixon's department. He signed the witness line. The only discrepancy is the story he's telling. The board chair, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Reynolds, turned to Victor. "Is this your voice, Mr. Dixon?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "That recording is inadmissible, unauthorized." "Answer the question," she said. His silence answered for him. Natalia, seated quietly at the far end, spoke for the first time. "For the record, I was present. The recording is accurate." The chair leaned back. "Effective immediately, Mr. Dixon. You're suspended pending investigation. Director Brooks, your transparency in this matter is noted." Victor's jaw tightened. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but the guard at the door was already waiting. As he passed me, his gaze burned cold. "You think you won? You just built yourself into the story." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By afternoon, the outreach fair had transformed the Children's Center into a small carnival of laughter and paper streamers. Parents drifted between booths. The Riverbend model gleamed under soft lights, its miniature balconies catching the sun through the window. Brianna approached me, envelope in hand. "It's small," she said, "but it's a start." Inside was a check, $200 memo line, first repayment. I closed her hand around it. "Keep it for Leo's school shoes," I said. "The debt's not yours to carry anymore." Her eyes shimmered. "You saved us," she whispered. "No," I said. "We saved each other." Across the room, Adrian stood near the model, explaining to a small crowd how the building would include affordable units for single parents. He looked different, lighter, unarmored. When the crowd dispersed, he walked over, hands in his pockets. "Board's finishing the review," he said. "They thanked me for my ethical resilience." Imagine that. "Congratulations," I said. He smiled, tired but sincere. "You recorded him." "I did," I said. "You always said truth doesn't need shouting, just proof." "It also needs witnesses," I replied. He hesitated. "Do you think we can start over?" I looked around, the laughter, the sunlight spilling over the children's drawings, Brianna kneeling beside Leo, and thought about how rebuilding doesn't mean pretending the cracks never happened. "We can start honest," I said. "That's better." He nodded, eyes bright. "Honest, then." When the fair ended and the last balloon sagged, I walked to my car. The street was quiet, a kind of peace that feels borrowed. Under the windshield wiper, an envelope waited, plain, white, unmarked. Inside lay a single white rose and a flash drive labeled Final Report, Riverbend Phase 3. I looked around. No footsteps, no silver sedan, no sign of who had left it. The rose smelled faintly of rain and endings. I turned the flash drive over in my palm, the inked label catching the streetlight. "So it isn't over yet," I whispered. And as the night pressed close, I slipped the drive into my coat pocket, knowing tomorrow would ask the same question every truth eventually does. How much more are you willing to see? Morning light slid across the apartment floor, touching the empty vase on the counter. No roses, no petals, just glass holding the shape of what used to be. I sat with the flash drive between my fingers, small and heavy with possibility. Adrian poured coffee, still cautious, still gentle. "You going to open it?" he asked. "Someone left it on my car last night," I said. "White rose inside. No note." His brow furrowed. "Could be a trap." "Or it could be the truth finally trying to reach us," I said. He nodded. "Let's find out." I slid the drive into the laptop. The screen blinked, then filled with folders labeled Invoices, Draft Procurement Compliance Logs. The final file read Victor Dixon Transfers.xlsx. I opened it. Numbers poured across the screen. Dates, amounts, vendor codes. Most legitimate, but every few rows, the amounts veered into another column, routed through a consulting firm that didn't exist. Offshore account, reimbursement loops, the kind of forgery that looks neat until you breathe on it. Adrian leaned closer, eyes wide. He was embezzling, using the same contingency fund he accused me of misusing. "And the flash drive proves it," I said quietly. "Whoever left this wanted us to finish what we started." "Probably Natalia," he murmured. "She said she had backup logs." I nodded. "Let's bring it to the board." 2 hours later, Ms. Reynolds sat at the head of the MUB conference table, glasses perched low on her nose. "You two certainly know how to keep a week interesting," she said dryly. Adrian placed the drive in front of her. "Everything you need is in there. Transfer history, dummy vendor names, even his sign-off codes." I added, "He built a side pipeline under the project fund, using Brianna's loan as cover. He wasn't protecting the company, he was siphoning from it." Ms. Reynolds turned to the IT specialist who was already scrolling through the files. The room went silent except for the hum of the projector. "Confirmed," the technician said. "At least $180,000 diverted over 6 months. He used the medical contingency account as camouflage." Reynolds looked up at Adrian. "Director Brooks, you're officially cleared of all wrongdoing. The board will issue a full statement. Mrs. Carter. She met my eyes. Thank you for your diligence. Without your documentation, this would have ended differently. Adrian reached for my hand under the table, fingers tentative, as though touching new glass. I didn't pull away. Ms. Reynolds leaned back. Victor Dixon tendered his resignation an hour ago. He left a final email before we locked his access. You may want to read it. She passed over a printed page. Adrian unfolded it and we read together. Every structure has cracks, even the ones we build with love. Some just hide them better than others. No apology, no defense, just philosophy from a man who mistook manipulation for genius. When we left the building, the sun had risen high, bouncing off the glass facade of Meridian Urban Builders. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like the building was watching me. It felt like it was finally exhaling. 2 weeks later, the Riverbend Boulevard residences opened. Ribbons cut, cameras flashed, applause filled the plaza. The city called it a triumph of community design. Natalia stood with her team near the model, professional but proud. When our eyes met, she smiled faintly and gave a small nod, acknowledgement without pretense. Brianna handled the financial paperwork, her posture straight, confident. Her badge read, Financial Compliance Coordinator. When I passed, she whispered, Debt-free, finally. Behind her, Leo raced in circles, superhero backpack bouncing as he ran. Jordan lifted him for a photo with the new building rising behind them, glass, steel, sunlight, and second chances. Adrian stepped beside me, hands in his pockets. They want me to give a short speech, he said. I don't know what to say. Say the truth, I answered. That's always enough. He hesitated, then walked to the podium. His voice carried easily. When we build something lasting, we forget the most fragile material we use is trust. The foundation isn't concrete, it's integrity. That's what holds the walls when everything else shakes. The crowd applauded. He turned toward me after stepping down. That was for us, he said softly. I know, I said. We lingered as people drifted away, the air filled with laughter and camera clicks. Across the plaza, Mr. Laurent from the MUB lobby leaned against a railing, nodding at me with a warm smile. I waved back. The city glowed the same way it had on the day this all began, yet nothing looked familiar. Even the reflection of the Riverbend Tower in the water below seemed steadier. We walked home together, side by side, but not touching, both aware of the distance we'd earned and the bridge we'd built to cross it. At the apartment, the white rose vase still sat on the counter. I lifted it, turned it once in my hands, and set it in the recycling bin. Adrian watched, quiet. No more symbols? No more illusions, I said. We'll buy wildflowers next time. They live closer to the ground. He smiled, a little sad, a little grateful. That night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights bloom against the river. My reflection stared back, older, steadier, no longer asking for explanations. Work matters, I said softly, repeating his old phrase. Then I added, but truth matters more. If you've been listening all this time, tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone enough to dig through the wreckage just to find what's real? Because sometimes that's the only way a heart learns how to build again. And as I turned off the light, the city exhaled with me. Quiet, complete, and honest at last.